The Black Ops 6 beta was definitely a mixed bag, but one thing I've always appreciated about Treyarch games is they're a bit more proactive with conversations around their games than a lot of other companies that you run into. And already we have our first information on how Black Ops 6 is going to be changing for launch, with the guys at Treyarch detailing some key criticisms that I've had in my previous videos that are going to be changed by the time the game releases. And I gotta say, this is actually a pretty encouraging blog post. Now, I do want to underpin all of this information by saying that I still have some overarching concerns about the fact that Call of Duty's anti-cheat is going to get ran through like no tomorrow, but it's still worth mentioning that some of these changes are pretty substantial in terms of the gameplay, and I actually think will be quite promising. Straight off the rip in this blog post, Call of Duty has shown us all of the new TAC maps for all of the maps that are coming to the game that we didn't get to play in the beta. And these are really promising. One of my biggest criticisms about what I played in the Black Ops 6 beta is that it all felt super compact and super condensed, and all of the maps felt too small. And it seems that the other 8 maps that they have coming at launch primarily feature larger spaces that make the game feel a bit more balanced and not super condensed and claustrophobic like the other ones. Payback in particular, a map that they have available, looks really promising, and I think generally the designs that we're seeing here are looking quite exciting. This definitely very early on addresses one of my earliest criticisms of the game, feeling like it was just playing multiple different variants of Shipment. Don't get me wrong, there still will be some feelings of that with some of the maps being strike maps, but a lot of the other core 6v6 maps actually feel quite fleshed out in a very promising manner. The developers have also stated that spawns were something that they were deliberately testing during the beta, and part of the reason the beta was running was to try and collect as much information as possible on how they could address that, and it's something that they're going to be working on the logic throughout the further release of the game. Performance issues were also indicated here in terms of things like script errors, people backing out, people crashing, UI crashes, and more importantly hitching, which is something that a lot of people saw with frame stutter or potentially packet bursting, is something they've listed as hoping to have solved for the release of the game. Now that's lots of the sort of nitty-gritty details out of the way, but the most important ones are actually how Call of Duty is addressing gunplay and also addressing things like movement, the core systems of the game and the foundations that I feel are the most critical and the things that I have the most criticism for going into how Black Ops 6 released. And the weapon systems and movement systems for this game are getting changes going forward before the game comes out. And there's also some other key features that I feel are actually quite promising to make the multiplayer and general core dynamics of this game better. With weapon systems, they're already indicating that headshot damage is going to be reworked. This was actually one of the key features of criticism in the video that I made on the Black Ops 6 beta, and it is being addressed. They said that as a common piece of feedback, low headshot damage with reduced impact of skillful play made it difficult to control certain power positions and made the gunplay inconsistent, and they should be rewarding players who land headshots. They also say that they don't want hit location multipliers to significantly affect the consistency of time to kill in Black Ops 6. And this is a very fair point to make. You know, you don't want it so that random hip-fire headshots are making some guns kill faster than others, but you do also want longer range fights and medium range fights to feel satisfying if you're more accurate than the other opponent. So I'm glad to see that they are addressing this for the release of the game, and it is something that they're looking into, and it also comes with a change to bullet penetration. They've said that bullet penetration is too overpowered, and in general, players will notice few extreme cases of bullets doing too much damage through certain surfaces. They're also looking at what surfaces should and shouldn't be penetrable for the release of the game. Definitely something I noticed in some of the smaller maps is that it felt like the entire map was entirely penetrable and that it didn't feel like any of your cover was actually assisting you. And it looks like this is changing going into Black Ops 6. There's also improvements to the fluidity of aiming down sight with snipers, improvements to fluidity of swapping weapons during sprint and tactical sprint, reduction of weapon motion during crouch transitions, and also a small lift to shotguns and targeted adjustments across all weapons to keep SMGs from overperforming relatively to other classes. These are all really exciting changes, and I think all address some of the key criticisms that I had going into the gunplay for this game, and also the added additions of better fluidity while swapping weapons while sprinting and tactical sprinting is going to make this game feel better. I still think the devil's in the detail, and I still think execution is a critically important feature here in terms of headshot multipliers, bullet penetration, and the general feel and handling of weapons. And I still think there's a lot that they need to do. But based on this blog post and what we've heard so far, they are heading in the right direction for the release of Black Ops 6. The next is movement systems, and there are a couple of critical movement updates here that they've gone for. They've said that they've improved several areas for improvement for third-person animations and also first-person animations in terms of sliding, diving, and jumping. And this is really good in order to nail down predictability. One of the biggest issues with the Omni movement system is that if people are moving around and serpentining and doing all of these crazy movements in different directions, the animations between first and third person have to line up correctly, and they have to be obvious movements that are predictable to track. If every slide and dive animation looks slightly different, it ultimately means that tracking those targets is going to be much more challenging. So they're trying to build a sort of consistency arc here in terms of fluidity, but also in terms of how it visually looks. They've also said that they've adjusted the sliding for improved predictability and fluidity as well, based on the distance of how far you can slide, and also reducing the number of instances known as a dead slide, where players are trying to go into a second slide out of sprint and then accidentally crouching. And this is to make the whole system and setup more consistent so that you get less dead movement or dead slides and more predictability. They've also said that they've also slightly reduced the maximum amount of slide duration as well in order to just make things feel a bit more compact and consistent. One of the lesser touched on features of this blog post is that they've actually reduced the overall camera motion as well while sprinting, tack sprinting, and also sliding. It's one of the systems that I feel could be the most problematic for new players, is that all of this inertia whilst moving around, sliding, tack sprinting, and going into these animations can make them quite uncomfortable, and that is being addressed. The important thing is that all of these changes I've listed, both in terms of how weapons work, the weapon balancing, how generally headshot multipliers are working, and the movement system and penetration systems, are all key features that are going to transition over to the rest of the game as well. So Warzone, by extension, is going to benefit from these changes. Overarchingly, I'd say between looking at these different tack maps of much larger maps that are coming at the release of the game, and looking at some of these more key specific pinpoint changes to things like headshot damage, bullet pen, and movement, I'm actually feeling a lot more confident about how Black Ops 6 is going to release. Now, whilst I am personally not the most overwhelming multiplayer fan in the world, I do have an appreciation for how these details can transition over to Warzone, and I do have an appreciation for how the multiplayer experience can generally be improved. And I'd say everything listed in this blog post so far has really kind of hit the nail on the head as to where Black Ops 6 was at during the beta and where it should be by the time the game releases. And if I'm honest, these were some changes that I wasn't expecting. I would genuinely say that I thought this beta was just going to be a straight up, this is what we're going to get at launch and we don't really have time to change anything, and it's ultimately more promoting the game as marketing as opposed to actually gathering data. But it seems that they've actually done a fair amount that's going to improve what could be a very promising multiplayer experience for Black Ops 6. Now, again, the devil is still very much in the detail. Headshot multipliers are a concern, bullet damage and bullet penetration are a concern, damage ranges are a concern, and I'd also say some of the movement stuff in terms of accessibility and making sure that regular players feel in sync with these new dynamics are all things that I think do need execution and have to be done well by the time the game releases later this year, or it's going to be problematic for the vast majority of players. But so far, this first push is heading in the right direction. Let me know your thoughts and feelings in the comment section down below, and as always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.